Hello my friends, I've been using Sony A7 IV for about 4 months, which means that it is a time for my extended medium-term review. The A7 IV was announced after a long wait and with very high expectations. My first impressions were overwhelmingly positive, but there are still some aspects of the A7 IV that require a deeper look. In this video, we will take a more in-depth look at the A7 IV and its performance in real-world scenarios. The body of the A7 IV is similar to other Sony full-frame cameras, and I'm starting to appreciate the continuity. I was able to take the A7 IV on a short trip abroad where I also got to appreciate the compact size. It is a little bit larger than the A7 III, but it is still tiny for what it does. 3 months aren't enough to judge the durability, but I haven't encountered any issues yet. The coating has also survived first 4 months with no scratches. One of the main improvements of the A7 IV is the new 33 megapixel sensor. Despite that the increase of resolution wasn't the #1 request from the users, I think that 33 megapixels is just about right for hybrid camera at the moment. It also doesn't have a low-pass filter, so it captures a very solid amount of detail, which is not that far from previous generation of A7R. The pixel density on this sensor is still relatively low, so you don't need the best lenses to take full advantage of the image quality. Even optically average lenses can mostly match this kind of pixel density and provide a very nice output. This sensor is backside illuminated and the ISO performance is basically the same as with other recent Sony full-frame cameras. ISO 3200 is very clean and perfectly usable. There is some noise at ISO 6400, but it is still usable for the majority of publication platforms. ISO 12800 is still usable, you will see some noise, but it is okay for online publishing. ISO 25600 is an emergency option. The noise is clearly visible, but just like other Sony full-frame sensors, it can still get the colors right. There were some rumors saying that the A7 IV is worse in the low light than the A7 III, but that is not true. The amount of noise is basically the same after the downsampling. The dynamic range is also outstanding as expected from a modern Sony-made full-frame BSI sensor. For digital publishing, you have basically unlimited options to play with sliders in editing. If we compare downsampled images, the dynamic range will be again similar to other Sony BSI full-frame sensors. I generally don't think that the dynamic range will limit your printing or publishing options as long as you avoid using very high ISO. Even in very challenging light conditions, I was always able to extract enough information from the RAWs without introducing too much noise. The colors seem to be very identical to A7S III, which is very positive in my opinion. The colors with picture profile off are also similar to other Sony cameras, but I have noticed that the automatic white balance in difficult situations such as with overcast sky is better. Other than that, it produces accurate and neutral colors as usual. The autofocus has been flawless during my testing. A7 IV uses Sony's latest autofocus system with 759 phase detection points and 425 contrast detection points. This is the same system as with the A7S III. The speed, the accuracy, and the reliability are flawless. That applies to both stills and video. I have also done some more tracking tests and I wasn't able to find any situation where it would struggle. It also has the same settings as the A7S III for video autofocus, which means that there are 7 steps for autofocus speed and 5 steps for responsiveness, which is now called Shift Sense. These change the behavior of the autofocus very dramatically and they will allow you to use fast autofocus for run-and-gun situations, very smooth autofocus for more cinematic shots, or anything between that. It has been reported that there might be some issues with the accuracy of the eye autofocus, but I don't shoot portraits at all, so I will leave the testing of that to somebody who does. The upgrade of the video specs was probably the #1 request from the users, so let's take a look at that. Despite that the A7 IV has pretty high resolution sensor, it can still shoot fully downsampled 7K to 4K video up to 30p. As I've said in my original review, it produces the most detailed 4K video of all cameras that I've ever tested, so it just looks great. 10-bit codecs are definitely a step forward and basically a standard in this category nowadays. The whole combination of natural detail, excellent signal-to-noise ratio, and the codecs produces very solid footage. A7 IV can shoot 4K Ultra HD video in 10-bit 422 using all-intra or long GOP encoding. The all-intra bitrate goes up to 250 megabits per second in 25p and 500 megabits per second in 50p. In long GOP, it is very manageable 140 megabits per second in 25p and 200 megabits per second for 50p in 4K 422 10-bit. I've actually been using picture profile off a lot for video because it saves a lot of time and it provides nice natural colors. My favorite picture style continues to be picture profile 8 with Cine 4 Gamma. Lower base ISO at 125 is a significant improvement over 200 on older cameras, so I like that a lot. One disappointment for me personally is the S-Cine tone. It basically appears to be picture profile off with lifted shadows and lower sharpness. It definitely doesn't look bad, but I much prefer using picture profile 8 with Cine 4 and just raise the saturation to 140 to get easy cinematic look. S-Log 3, on the other hand, works really well on the A7 IV. Shooting the S-Log 3 is actually pretty easy even with no assistance features. If you overexpose by one stop and set correct white balance, it will work in most situations. 10-bit footage captures plenty of information for expanding the flat gamma curve, which captures a great amount of dynamic range. The first controversial aspect of the A7 IV is the 4K 60p crop. I guess that everybody agrees that no crop 4K would be better, but it is what it is. The APS-C 4K 60p is not bad though. It is downsampled from 4.6K and it captures very solid amount of detail. I wouldn't hesitate at all to use it together with full sensor 4K. The main inconveniences are the change in the field of view and the low light. Having to readjust the focal length is definitely inconvenient. In the low light, it performs like a modern APS-C camera, so it is not bad, but not on full frame level. The second controversial point is the rolling shutter. My take on this topic is that unless you film something very specific, such as high-speed trains passing by, it is not an issue. The rolling shutter is basically the same as with the A7 III, which means that it is definitely not terrible and it won't ruin your footage in reasonable situations. One of the features that is incredibly useful for me personally is the focus breathing compensation in video. As you know, Sony FE 24mm f1.4 GM and 20mm f1.8 G are among my most favorite lenses of all time. The focus breathing is basically the only complaint that I have about these two lenses. I really like to use 24mm GM for hands-on shots with blurred background, but the focus breathing is an issue if I use the autofocus. Focus breathing compensation completely fixes that. Unfortunately, it only works with Sony lenses, not with third-party lenses. The A7 IV uses a well-known 5.5 stop in-body image stabilization, which seems to be the same unit as in the A7S III. I think that it is more than sufficient, and I've also been getting very good results with both active mode and gyro data. The stabilization itself is rather effective, and I would say that it is sufficient up to about 75mm. The active mode only requires 1.1 times crop, which is quite acceptable if you need additional stabilization. If you stabilize the footage in post using gyro data, you will even get usable walking footage with wide-angle lenses. Up to about 17mm, you can get stabilization similar to the best action cameras this way. Regarding the handling, much like with the form factor, I'm starting to appreciate the continuity. The controls are basically the same as with A7R IV or A7 III. There are 3 command dials, a joystick, 4-way pad, and 12 customizable buttons. A huge improvement is the addition of stills and video switch. Advanced controls such as the drive mode dial or focus mode switch are not available, but custom buttons pretty effectively substitute those. Having said that, I definitely wouldn't mind the A9 style drive mode dial on A7 cameras. The biggest upgrade in terms of the handling and the controls is the new user interface. A7 IV has a lot more features than the A7 III, so users will probably have to use the main menu a lot more. Fortunately, it is really well structured and organized. The orientation is much easier and the order of the items is a lot more logical in comparison to the old horizontal menu. Another big improvement is that everything can be controlled using the touchscreen. After I got used to it, it definitely sped up the orientation in the main menu. The function menu is the same as with older cameras, but now you can also control it using the touchscreen and it is fully customizable. Overall, I am very happy with this menu system and it is one of the main improvements over the A7 III in my opinion. The third controversial aspect of the A7 IV is the screen. It has just over 1 million dots, which is below average by 2022 standards. On the other hand, a big improvement is that the aspect ratio is 3:2. That means that the actual live view feed is larger. In the real world, it is surprisingly fine to use. The brightness and the color accuracy is much better than on the A7 III. The amount of detail also seems fine to me, so it is a lot better than I expected based on that 1 million dot resolution. It indeed uses a rotating mechanism. I still can't say that I got used to it, but I can live with it. It is actually quite useful on a tripod, but it still gets in the way in usual handheld photography scenarios. The manipulation is more finicky and slower, but it is what it is. I don't really have anything new to say about the electronic viewfinder. It is a well-known 3.68 million dot EVF with 0.78 times magnification, which is completely fine to use. The last controversial aspect of the A7 IV is the shooting speed. The A7 IV can shoot 10 frames per second, which is rather average value, and it does so with 12-bit RAWs. If you want 14-bit RAWs, it goes down to 6 frames per second. If you want to use any kind of fast action with A7 IV, you definitely need to use CF Express Type A card. That will give you basically unlimited buffer. If you use SD cards, the shooting speed will slow down after about 18 shots, which isn't great. The A7 IV may still be good for fast action thanks to the excellent autofocus tracking, but you will either have to accept 12-bit files, which shouldn't be that bad, or 6 frames per second. 33 megapixel resolution also offers a lot of room for cropping, which is also useful for fast action. The A7 IV has 2 card slots. One is UHS-2 SD and CF Express A compatible, and the second one is only for SD cards. Realistically, you need to use the CF Express card for 500 megabits per second video codecs and to get that basically unlimited buffer. SD cards are sufficient for everything else. The battery life has been really good during my testing. The CPA rating is 580 shots, which is less than with A7 III, but the real-world battery life is similar. One battery is enough for 1 day of my typical travel shooting. It can also last for about 150 minutes of continuous 4K 25p 10-bit recording, which is a great result. I wasn't able to test the A7 IV in temperatures about 20 degrees Celsius yet, but I haven't experienced any issues with overheating at a room temperature whatsoever. To sum up, my experiences with A7 IV over the past 4 months have been overwhelmingly positive. I can say that I am very happy with the output as well as the user experience. I do appreciate their 33 megapixel resolution for stills, and the video in terms of both detail and the codecs is great. The same applies to the autofocus and image stabilization. Focus breathing compensation may also be a huge benefit for owners of certain lenses. Regarding those 4 controversial points, rolling shutter is completely fine unless you shoot something very specific. Continuous shooting speed could definitely be better. 4K crop is an inconvenience in terms of the framing, but not in terms of the video quality. The display is actually surprisingly fine. I still think that full sensor 4K 60p and let's say 12 frames per second in 4-bit would have made the A7 IV a no-brainer, but even as it is, I think that it is a great hybrid camera and I can highly recommend it. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.